analyzing and verifying non-self. The aggregate of feelings. It refers to an aggregation of diverse and numerous sensations, which can be briefly categorized into three types: pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, and neutral feelings, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. We can easily recognize that these three types of sensations change moment by moment, like clouds. No sensation possesses an inherent nature. We experience the transience of feelings clearly. Since sensations pass quickly, we can easily recognize their lack of inherent nature. For example, when drinking tea, from the first sip onward, the sensation of the tea differs every instant. The sensations of eating, the heat and cold of the body, or physical pain, all arise and cease moment by moment. Sometimes the pain is intense, sometimes it lessens, after a while it dissipates, everything will eventually pass away. Even the suffering in hell will ultimately come to an end. It won't last forever. When the karmic retribution is over, the suffering ceases. No sensation has an inherent nature. The aggregate of perception. The aggregate of perception is the function of generating mental images. When perceiving any visual object, the mental factor of perception first produces the corresponding visual image. When the ear hears a sound, the sound is an auditory image. When the ear faculty contacts an auditory object, an auditory image arises. This is the functioning of the mental factor of perception. Without it, no auditory image could arise. Similarly, when the nose faculty contacts an olfactory object and sensation arises, the mental factor of perception generates the corresponding olfactory image, pleasant or unpleasant. Then, consciousness discerns it. The thinking of consciousness requires images. For example, during dreams, the ear produces sound images, the eye generates visual images, and the nose creates smell images. Only after these images arise does the sixth consciousness think about them. When we think, such as remembering someone, their image arises in the mind. We bring the deepest impression of them to our minds. Imagination means mentally drawing their appearance, which is the function of the mental factor of perception. Then, consciousness discriminates it. Hence, the mental factor of perception helps our six consciousnesses function. Without it, none of the six consciousnesses could arise. For without perception, what images would consciousness discern? Without images, there would be nothing to discriminate. Therefore, all phenomena involve images. We cling to images. After images arise, our consciousness discerns them. The aggregate of mental formations. After discernment occurs, the aggregate of mental formations acts. Formation means action. All mental factors that create karma, including wholesome and unwholesome mental factors, belong to the aggregate of mental formations. Its primary function is to take action. The aggregate of consciousness. It consists of 6 types: eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. The aggregate of consciousness recognizes and discriminates images. Ear consciousness recognizes sound images, and eye consciousness recognizes visual images. The function of recognizing visual images is called eye consciousness. Clearly, they all arise and cease according to causes and conditions moment by moment, like illusions, without inherent nature. This analysis shows that what we call the self is merely a combination of these 5 aggregates. Upon analysis, we find each aggregate is devoid of inherent nature. Hence, their combination also lacks inherent nature. They depend on causes and conditions. A person is simply the combination of these 5 aggregates. During meditation, please carefully observe and reflect on each of these 5 aggregates. Some non-Buddhist practitioners regard the aggregate of form as the self. Others see the aggregate of perception as the self, while some view the aggregate of consciousness as the self. By analyzing each one, we find that no aggregate contains a self. We have always mistakenly regarded the mind as continuous and unchanging. We see our past mind and present mind, or yesterday's mind and today's mind, as the same, considering them to be our minds. In reality, if we analyze with the approach of past, present, and future, the previous moment has vanished, the future hasn't arrived, and the present disappears moment by moment. We will find that the mind is not constant. Even the mind from just a moment ago differs from the present mind. The beliefs and thoughts we assume to be unwavering are constantly changing. Consider the education we received in childhood, and the beliefs and ideas we held at that time. Now, as everyone creates karma, modern people's thoughts and emotions are unconsciously changing. Take the father-son relationship as an example. From the child's infancy through ages 1, 2, 3, 4, and into adulthood, the father's feelings toward his son continuously change. What begins as deep affection in the early stages may later turn into animosity. They might even sever their relationship. Such cases happen and are quite normal. All emotions change. No emotional connection remains constant. Romantic relationships are even more changeable, like clouds in the sky, fluctuating constantly. No one can make an eternal vow. Even if one makes such a vow, one will inevitably change. Emotions change every instant. Since even the so-called self changes, how could an emotional connection remain constant? There is no self, and what we call romantic bonds are merely emotional attachments arising and ceasing moment by moment. It is just the operation of thoughts and clinging, without a concrete subject behind them. When you love someone, you are merely attached to their appearance or temperament. If you are drawn to their personality, it's simply because the operation of their mind temporarily harmonizes with yours. In interaction, your thoughts agree with each other, or perhaps your yin-yang and 5 elements are compatible. There is no real I love you or you love me. Attachment to the body is just a visual habit, finding the other person aesthetically pleasing based on your preferences. There are also mental habits, such as liking certain behaviors or thoughts, because they seem like-minded. Upon examination, we find these are all illusory. Upon analysis, we realize there is nothing worth clinging to. There is nothing in you worth clinging to, as even the self is an illusion. Through such observation, we recognize that the 5 aggregates, form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, all lack inherent nature. Due to ignorance, sentient beings mistakenly regard the combination of these 5 aggregates as a real self. By combining the 5 aggregates, we see them as a real self. Before confirming that the 5 aggregates are not self, we must repeatedly observe and analyze how we mistake our body or mind for a self, until we are sure of it without rational analysis. Keep in mind that the 5 aggregates are not self. Instead of saying no self, we say, the 5 aggregates are not self. This means there isn't a self within the 5 aggregates, which slightly differs from no self. Earlier, I briefly observed and analyzed each of the 5 aggregates rationally. You can analyze them in even greater detail until you confirm that the 5 aggregates are not self from the perspectives of theory and logic, gaining a genuine conviction. This is a crucial stage. What we call reincarnation does not involve a real self that transmigrates. It is simply the 5 aggregates arising and ceasing moment by moment. What we call reincarnation means that when the aggregate of form stops working, while the other 4 aggregates continue functioning, one takes on a new aggregate of form. When one dies, the 4 aggregates of feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness still operate. They arise and cease moment by moment, just as they do when we are alive. The so-called death means the aggregate of form stops working, while the other 4 aggregates continue arising, changing, and ceasing. Thus, one finds a new aggregate of form, a new physical body, to dwell in, which we call rebirth. The other 4 aggregates keep going as continuums of similar items. There is no constant self that controls all these experiences. Even death is merely the collapse of the aggregate of form. What we call death is merely the collapse of the aggregate of form, like a machine that stops working. However, the other 4 aggregates haven't come to an end. They continue functioning, arising and ceasing. Due to the continuation of karma, the aggregates continue arising and ceasing. The consciousness firmly clings to the existence of a self. Because consciousness firmly clings to the existence of a self, a bardo body will arise after death. Though the physical body has expired, the 4 aggregates of the bardo body also have sensations, thoughts, actions, and consciousness, able to recognize and distinguish. So, don't be afraid of death. Death is simply the expiration of one aggregate while the others continue. It is not frightening. I encourage you to frequently observe and contemplate that the self is a composite of the 5 aggregates. What we call death is just the collapse of the aggregate of form, while the other 4 aggregates remain intact. They won't break down because they can't. They continue arising and ceasing as a continuum of similar items. If one's virtuous karma allows them to continue to be reborn as a human, they will see their future parents engaged in intercourse, arouse desire, join them, and thus enter the womb. This is one type of rebirth, to find a new physical body. There are many types of rebirth. From then on, they start a new life. Death is like the pause of the aggregate of form during sleep. Entering dreams resembles entering the intermediate state after death. Waking up with the aggregate of form resuming functioning is similar to obtaining a new aggregate of form after rebirth. Our daily waking hours resemble being alive. Falling asleep at night is similar to death, and dreaming is like the bardo state. Bardo beings, without a tangible body, ponder and wander around. When we wake up the next day, we reboot our physical body. Similarly, death means the physical body breaks down. The next morning we take a new body. In reality, the body we go to bed with is not the same as the one we wake up with, because the aggregate of form arises and ceases every instant. The metabolism of cells is extremely rapid. Tens or hundreds of millions of chemical reactions occur every second. This is how our bodies change. If you observe under a microscope, you will see that your entire body has changed overnight. Some people look charming before sleeping, but wake up with puffy eyes the next morning. Therefore, the physical body is constantly changing. When we wake up in the morning, it's a new body to be reactivated. still arising and ceasing moment by moment. What we call death simply means the physical body stops working and needs to be replaced. When we sleep every night, we are repairing our physical body. When we feel tired, what tires is not the body but the consciousness and the aggregate of mental formations. The aggregate of mental formations is the creator of karma, like a car's engine. A car's windshield and other parts don't tire, but the engine does. The engine needs to take a break. Similarly, the aggregate of mental formations fatigues and needs rest. Physical effort also belongs to the aggregate of mental formations, cooperating with mental effort. For example, grocery shopping appears to be a physical activity. But doesn't driving, walking, and selecting groceries during the process require mental effort? Even throwing a stone requires careful aiming. There's no absolute boundary between physical and mental effort. Even during mental work, isn't the act of writing physical labor? Without lifting your hand, how can you see what you are writing? Isn't that a physical effort? Even sitting requires physical effort. Without physical strength, you would immediately collapse like a corpse. Once the body stops exerting force, it would fall over like a zombie. How can it not require physical effort? Without physical strength, how could one remain seated? Now, we can answer the two questions raised earlier. If the self doesn't exist, who creates karma? Who experiences the results? Doesn't this make everything meaningless? In reality, apart from the five aggregates of body and mind changing moment by moment, there is no inherently existent, permanent self. Although there is no real self, the five aggregates exist as continuums of similar items. Please keep this in mind. The cessation of the five aggregates in one moment gives rise to the five aggregates in the next moment. Through the power of dependent arising, the actions of the five aggregates at the causal stage lead the five aggregates at the resultant stage to experience the effects. They have a connection, which is important. The arising of the next set of five aggregates depends on the previous five aggregates as a condition. Without the necessary conditions, the five aggregates of the next moment could not arise. Everything arises dependently, empty in nature. All phenomena are conditions. Conditions are intriguing. They refer to various forces. In conventional reality, karma never fails to function. All actions done by the five aggregates at the causal stage will accurately lead the five aggregates at the resultant stage to experience the corresponding suffering or happiness. The law of karma never goes wrong. The conditioned aggregates continue as a series of similar items without interruption. For this reason, one must inevitably experience the karmic results. Earlier actions lead to later effects, and those effects then become conditions for the arising of the next moment. The continuity never stops. Thus, one inevitably reaps what one sows. If the continuum could cease, we wouldn't experience the karmic consequences, and everything would end at death. But the five aggregates, arising dependently, never come to an end. Although there is no inherently existent self, there are physical and mental experiences. The five aggregates are functioning. Though they are not the self, they arise and cease as continuums of similar items. Because they arise and cease moment by moment, they appear uninterrupted. But they are just continuums. As they arise and cease, the adjacent elements appear similar. Since there is no inherently existent self, Why does Buddhism teach that one reaps what one sows? If you directly explain no self to those whose spiritual faculties are not yet mature, they are prone to falling into nihilism. They may believe that without a self, they can act recklessly. They might think, since there is no self, there is no doer of actions or experiencer of results, thereby denying the law of cause and effect. This view that denies karma is wrong. Although the 5 aggregates are not the self, they are functioning. Since there is functioning, there is dependent arising. Since there is dependent arising, there are causes and effects. Karma is based on the 5 aggregates, which arise and cease. Therefore, to adapt to convention, the Buddha established the notion of self, based on the 5 aggregates. Because the 5 aggregates are continuums of similar items, the karma created by one continuum will not ripen in another. Thus, action and its result occur within the same continuum without error. For this reason, the Buddha taught that one experiences the results of one's own actions. Everything we experience stems from what we have done. Please bear this in mind. Don't blame others or attribute your mistakes to someone else. Whatever you experience stems from what you have done, caused by your desire, aversion, delusion, doubt, and arrogance. Your ignorance, greed, anger, jealousy, and various other afflictions cause you to suffer. No one can hurt you. You reap what you sow.